Bonjour there and welcome to Medieval 1212 AD, a overhaul mod for Total War Attila that sets things in the medieval period, in a certain year. I'll leave you guessing which one. We're playing right here as the County of Toulouse in this abridged campaign where we'll look at the most interesting parts of what happens as I play as said County of Toulouse. You can see that right off the bat we're at war with France for some reason. I think there is a detailed historical reason why. It's something to do with the Crusades, but that doesn't matter to us. Basically, we're at war with France, we're losing money, and we have some troops, so we might as well just throw those troops up towards Orléans right now and try to make some progress. The problem is, between us and Orléans is Bordeaux, and Bordeaux is controlled by those disgusting English folk. So this means we have to trespass to use the road towards the enemy's territory. One potential way to get around that is to get the old military access treaty, but even throwing most of my money at them, they're not interested in that. They clearly don't trust us. However, I was able to grab this non-aggression pact, so I guess they won't interfere too much with our conquest of France, hopefully anyway. I ended up thinking, well, we can't let this stop us. We still need to do something, so we might as well just trespass. I've combined our two starting armies together, so we have a full stack, and this stack can just about make it to French territory this turn. Still counts as trespassing though, so we lose some relations with England for doing that. There's a French army already here. It looks like it might be set up to go south. There is another route into Orléans across a bunch of rivers that takes several turns. I'm going to leave this small leftover army behind to at least make a farce of defending against them. That army isn't enough to stop them if they do attack, but it's nice to pretend. We're not going to be doing much in terms of economy in this series, not only because I usually cut out economic stuff when I'm doing my gameplay commentaries, but this mod still suffers from Total War Attila disease, where most upgrades come with a big downside, and that downside can just prevent you from doing upgrades, as it does in this case. We can't really upgrade anything because of public order. Here's a quick look at the mod's tech tree. It did say somewhere that the tech tree hasn't really been implemented. This is only an early version of the mod. So there are just a few techs that unlock a few buildings, which we probably can't build anyway for the aforementioned reasons. That means we don't need to worry much about techs. There's nothing really essential going on in here. So I'll just pick a couple of random ones, and most likely we'll never talk about that again. Another thing going on in the background will be diplomacy, unless it happens to be something particularly useful. Here's just an example of the opening diplomatic strategy I'm going for. We want to be friends with all of these Spanish Christian factions, so they leave us alone while we invade France. They're going to be busy fighting the invading Muslims, so presumably they won't come over here and attack us anytime soon. We get some basic deals, and we're also already allied to one of them, so that all looks good. That means we can focus on France, but France are also focusing on us by the looks of things. Their main army under their king actually comes down to attack my main army, and the balance bar is very bad because the other army that was hanging around is in reinforcement range. Both armies look like they could be defeated separately here, but fighting them together seems to be too much, so I withdrew. We don't get a very good withdrawal. Now we're trapped between rivers to the north and south, so we can't move very much in our next turn. And the other enemy army that was there actually runs all the way around and attacks my little group with our king in it, or our count I suppose it is. That's another unfavourable fight, so he also retreats to another not particularly useful position, and immediately we're in a bit of a bind actually, because the French can now go and attack our territory if they want to. I'm still set on attacking their territory, but I did realise we could potentially use the river crossing here to fight one of their armies in a nice easy battle. So at first I fortified the river crossing, but we're going to come back to that actually. As for this situation in the south, the main issue is that our little group probably can't beat theirs. They've got a load of cav, including some chevalier who are basically knights, and we're just a couple of spear trash units and some trash crossbows, and then our king, a nice vulnerable stack to have our king in actually. The only thing I can really do here, because of our limited movement options, is go and stand right in front of the enemy and make a fort. That fort will multiply our power and give us some potential if they choose to attack us. As for the main army, I eventually decided to cross the river, losing most of our movement points, if only to bait the enemy into attacking me and get closer to the objective, both of which seemed like fine things to do. However, there was, it turns out, another French army just to the north, so we end up with another difficult situation. I retreat, and handily retreat closer to the objective, so I guess that worked out nicely. However, the function of the retreat doesn't actually come through, in that we still have the exact same battle right after. So, seems like the first engagement of this series is going to be a nice all or nothing difficult battle, just the way I likes it. The issue we do have though is that with this mod, the battle replays crash the game. That means we're going to be looking at battles in this campaign through the far inferior live footage. I also didn't realise for this first battle, so the footage is particularly bad. So, my apologies basically. We're going to be looking at a bunch of little squares with pointy stick icons on them running at each other on a nice grey background for the most part. In future battles, now that I know the replays don't really work, I'll try and get some actual better footage while playing the game. So, moving on, after a long time of waiting on this nice hill, the enemy force shows up to attack us. We have a lot of crossbows in our army, so I wanted to move up and do some crossbowing against the advancing enemy. However, the enemy are advancing too much, basically. As I move forward, we just get charged by all of their cav and imp, so I immediately move backwards again. There's going to be no skirmish, which is a shame since half of our army is crossbows. They're going to be somewhat wasted getting stuck at the back there with their line of sight blocked. Still, we can form a nice shield wall using our troops and make the enemy run into it, which is nice. One issue you might note is that I have my sword units on the end of my spear line. Normally people would do that the other way around, and I didn't really intend to do it like this. It's like that because the picture of the swords on the unit bar at the bottom looks kind of like they're holding a spear, and that was my reference for what unit that actually was. Just turned out they were swords upon further inspection. Oh well. So here you can see at the end of the line, those swords are eating 2 units of cav at the same time, but they are in some kind of shield wall formation which presumably buffs them against charges. What we want to do is get our own cav around behind the enemy and do the usual. However, there are quite a few free enemy units that are marauding around, and that's going to make things hard. In particular, the enemy cav aren't all committed, and even the ones that are in the fight are often coming back out of the fight, which is a good idea for them, but it's annoying for me because it's hard for me to go in and make uncontested rear attacks. Like right there, my cav got stopped. Luckily, by just giving some more move orders, we were able to escape, and the enemy cav were actually trying to go somewhere else, so they just ignored me after that. Very handy. On the left, my general and some more cav are pushing forwards, taking out a few enemy units and securing that flank, and the right wing cav have successfully made it in to do some nice rear attacks against enemy blobs. You might note, by the way, that it's not playing battle music. For some reason it kept playing the ambient music from the setup phase throughout most of this fight, further emphasizing the aesthetic poorness of this footage, so it's just getting worse and worse for me. But hey, we're plowing through. We've killed the enemy general somewhere on the field, so now things are going to start going our way. We see many enemy units on the front line routing away, freeing up more of our stuff to move. If I have the micro to do it, that is. 20 units is a bit too many things to micro at once, really, so I'm not making that good use of my crossbows. With real good micro, we could be getting in and making lots of nice flanking attacks, which would probably do devastating damage, but for the most part they're just doing nothing and having their line of sight blocked. Anyway, as you can see, the battle is swinging into our favour. The enemy are just all over the place, and it's a case of me frantically trying to pin them down, especially the enemy's cav. And eventually we do achieve this. We get lots of cav fights against our spears that go okay, and we do have good spears. We're not using levies in this army, we've got the spear sergeants or something they're called, the one that's a bit better. So here we are a while later when most stuff's routed. Suddenly the battle music kicks in for a completely unepic final part of the fight where we just need to kill routing units and rout everything. And we do especially need to kill routing units because half of the enemy army are reinforcements, and I think it's the same in Attila as it is in Rome 2, where units in reinforcement armies don't get auto-resolve to death basically when you press end battle. The one in the first army will suddenly lose 70% of the surviving troops after the fight to simulate you chasing them down. With reinforcements, I think you have to actually chase them down because it doesn't do that to the other armies in the battle. Anyway, the point is, after a while, we end up with this situation. The enemy lost most of their units, they lost a general, and they lost their king. How embarrassing. Our army looks okay, and we can actually replenish a little bit by taking on the captives. We're ready then to go on and attack Orléans as per the original plan. That all went okay. However, we now also need to fight the fort battle down to the south. They did attack that fort I set up in front of them, so time to see if it actually helps us out against the enemy's advantage. The fort is basically like the ones you get as Rome in the base game. which is an issue really. They're very big forts and they have a lot of gates, and we don't have many units, so most of the gates are going to be unguarded as we go into this battle. The thing I was looking out for was to see whether the towers would cut down some enemies for us, because if the towers prove to be effective, we can block the enemy in front of them and rack up the kills even without very many units. And by the way, a side note, I thought I'd add here an apology for the rest of this series if the audio levels get messed up, because whenever I go in and out of battles, for some reason it changes all of the settings and resets the music volume things in the options menu. Not really sure why, possibly something to do with the mod being in alpha. It might actually stop at some point, we'll see. Anyway, back to the fight. As you can see, the enemy are actually going for the unguarded other gates. I was genuinely surprised. I've been playing too much Rome 2, clearly. In Rome 2, the entire army would just attack the nearest gate, make a big blob, and then I'd simply rear attack them to win. But I forgot that in Attila, I guess they added some AI for fort battles, so they actually do try and attack multiple gates at the same time, which is a big problem for us. We have to leave some of the gates unguarded. We simply don't have enough separate units to guard them all. Plus, when the enemy do come in, they're not going to just ram forwards into the unit in front of them. They actually go to both sides, as you can see here, and immediately bypass us. I was genuinely very surprised the AI was bothering to do this. I thought they would just throw the whole thing away and give me the win, but they're trying, which is very mean. They've got 2 units on capture points in the corner. That's sort of nice because our crossbows can just shoot at them at point blank range. However, here I noticed my general had been engaged and I made another Rome 2 player's mistake. I tried to leave the fight. Of course, in Attila, if you give a movement order, your units kind of are simulated to have no stats, so they just get deleted instantly if they're already in combat. So the king dies within a second, and that's the end of his unit, and really, that's the end of the battle. The morale shock has almost routed my crossbows even at full strength. So yes, we're going to be probably losing this one very soon. As you can see, I decided to just spend my time watching the crossbows to see if they were doing anything. I suspected they weren't firing at the enemy, and a visual inspection confirms that no, they're actually not firing. Not really sure why. It's Total War Attila, stuff just doesn't necessarily work. So now everything gets killed by a variety of nice, colourful, interesting looking enemy knights, and that's a decisive defeat, and our faction leader dead. I always like to start an RFD campaign by losing my faction leader. It seems to happen surprisingly often, and this campaign has been no exception. Now the question is, what effect is this going to have strategically? The worry was that they would go on and attack one of our settlements, but nicely they decide to chase us down, so that distracts them a little bit. I figured our army would actually die here, but it doesn't. I thought the rule was if you lost 2 battles in the same turn, you just died. Maybe it's if you make 2 retreats in the same turn you die. I don't know. Basically, we lead the enemy away from our settlements by somehow surviving, so that's actually great. At the start of the next turn, we've lost some more men, and it seems to be because of a defection due to low integrity. That other army to our northeast are guys who've broken away due to hating us so much. Not sure why they hate me, this is going fine. Anyway, we push them out of the way, and then the guys who are still loyal will run to the north to just hang around the battlefront and act as a distraction, really. I'm ready to attack Orléans, but I also discovered Lyon to the east, and realised after a quick analysis that it's actually richer and is probably easier to take, so I went here instead. In terms of strategy, maybe it's a bit worse because we are more cut off from our home territories here, but we're not really using our home territories, to be fair. We're not going to recruit anything anytime soon. And by the way, in this mod there's no province system, which is absolutely amazing. You don't have to bother worrying about what province, quote unquote, each region is in and taking them in a specific order because of that or anything. You can just do whatever you want, which is great. As we saw there, my distraction army distracted the enemy a bit more, but nothing really came of that, which I suppose is the point of the distraction. At the start of the next turn, the 5th Crusade has started, and we are going to have the chance to go on that later on, so we'll look into that if we get some free time and some free armies. The French army that defeated us recently is just standing on the border and raiding, which is nice, I suppose. They're not bothering to contest our territory, buying us more time to contest their territory, which we certainly are doing. Here my distraction is going to continue its distraction mission. I thought maybe I could actually get back to my territory and add this general to the garrison or something so that we have more chance to defend. I ended up getting distracted by the presence of an enemy distraction force. Then I accidentally walked over the border there into English territory. This is actually because this footage was filmed over the course of a few days and I misremembered my getting of a military access treaty with England, thinking that I did get it, but no, as we saw in this very footage I did not, so clearly I can't remember anything. I'm really just mentioning that to make sure you know I'm much more incompetent than it appears. Anyway, back to this Lyon situation. We just auto-resolved the garrison, that was nice and easy. We do take some losses, but we can immediately start mitigating them with the Occupy, which gives us some of our troops back, and we'll get a turn of replenishment since we are forced to sit in the town this turn. We don't want to hang around any more than that, because we've got more France to conquer. We want to keep attacking before they recruit anything new. Meanwhile, the distraction force is still doing its work. These two little enemy groups come and fight us. We retreat, but unfortunately we are going to be forced into battle here. That's not a very good balance bar. I actually decided to do this one manually because I was checking out their archers and thinking if our general gets a good charge in there, we might be able to actually take out an enemy archer unit. This completely failed because the enemy cav just attacked me before I got to the archers, and now we know you cannot disengage because you die instantly. So once you're in a fight, you might as well just leave them to fight because they'll die much more slowly and they'll take some of the enemies with them. That means we end up with this result. It was effectively nothing, we barely killed any enemies really. And the other enemy group comes over to finish off this little group of surviving crossbowmen. So, our distraction army is finally dead, however the distraction was great. The enemy wasted several turns with half a stack's worth of troops chasing them around, and they weren't attacking our territory during that time. However, someone else is. The defectors from earlier seem to have teamed up with the French who were raiding. They're now sitting around near Montpellier. I thought I could sally out and take out the defectors, but the French do support them in battle. So that's a dangerous situation, and the distracted forces are now on their way down to join. We need to do something. We need to cause them to come back, ideally. And what better way to do that than to take Orléans? Or, if they do take our territory, well, we've got their territory, and perhaps theirs was better, so we still win. The enemy's settlement isn't particularly heavily defended, but the balance bar isn't that good either. We need a turn to make some siege equipment before we go ahead any further with that though. At home, here's a little look at the units we have available for recruitment, and I'm going to recruit one of them. Basically, it's bad spears, bad crossbows, okay crossbows, and okay swords, and a couple of okay cav units that I haven't tried out yet, probably okay anyway. So yes, with the tiny bit of income we now have after losing a bunch of stuff, we can add a general and one unit to the garrison of Toulouse in case it gets attacked. And good timing, it does get attacked immediately by the French raiding force. The other two tiny armies don't move to support, which is quite nice. Grab a random non-aggression with Flanders there, that might come in useful later. And down at Montpellier, the rebels try to attack us, but because the French have moved away, we just kill them instantly, and that's the end of that. The issue with sieges in Attila is that any siege, even one that's ended on the first turn it starts, causes damage to the town, so we'll now have to pay a bunch of money to get the city back up to working order. After that, some kind of cutscene, quote-unquote play, something attempts to happen. It does softlock the game. It's trying to tell me about the crusade that it already told me about earlier. Basically, after a while, things come back, and yes, there's a crusade we could go on if we want to, but we can't really do that right now. What we can do though is attack Orléans. We've got 8 ladders and 2 rams prepared. The balance bar is now more in our favour than it was last time, and realistically, that's an auto-resolve. If you're playing the campaign optimally, we'll probably lose more men in a manual resolve, because the auto-resolve kind of ignores things like towers and wall advantages a little bit. However, to be nice to the enemy, and to provide something perhaps a bit more interesting for the opening episode of this campaign, let's take it in manually. I've got a very special opening strategy for this one, although actually the first thing I need to do is tell that guy to go away. Another thing that constantly gets reset is the advice levels thing in the options menu, so every battle he likes to tell me something, and now he's gone again for a while. As for my special strategy, it was basically to do nothing before the fight started, because I read a rumour on the internet that if you don't give any deployment orders before the battle starts, the replays don't break in this mod, and I can confirm that for me at least that is not the case. We're still hearing the live footage. At least the place where the game put me at the start is pretty close to the easiest place to attack on the enemy wall, where some of their towers are already destroyed. So we get into position and go to climb up that part of the wall. Once we get close, a bunch of enemy units appear who were previously out of our line of sight, but they're not really defending the wall very well. Most of them aren't in position, so our ladders do have an easy time setting up and our troops go in to fight. The stuff they're going to be facing is probably worse than them, I guess, anyway. They're levied spears and levied Vuld troops against my swords leading the attack. I like to think we're going to trade favourably there. And over on the left I've got some swords chasing after a couple of units of enemy crossbows. That fight's going to be developing into something more decisive than I thought later on. For now, the main fight is that blob on the right, where we've got a whole bunch of enemy stuff fighting my one sword unit. There's a free spear unit that I'm trying to lock down with some of my own spears. We've successfully got those crossbows on the left into melee with our swords, which is nice. The rest of our crossbows are really not doing anything in this fight. Crossbows don't have the arc to shoot over even these low walls. So while I hoped they might be firing at will to whittle down the enemy, they basically didn't do anything for the entire battle. I'm making a move here to try and get my cav to rear attack the enemy's main blob after having successfully opened up the nearby gate, which is now undefended because the enemy blobbed up so much like that. The cav don't really have room to charge or anything, but this attack does cause at least one unit to rout. The issue is that a lot of the stuff in this blob is anti-cav stuff, so if they turn around and start fighting us, that might not be the best fight. This unit of spears will go take out a tower over on the right side because it can just about shoot at my guys who are hanging out near the gate. And on the left, things are really not progressing very well. I've slowly taken out one unit of enemy crossbows in melee, but the fact that the enemy have towers shooting me, they have more crossbows shooting at me, and now they've thrown in some of their levied vulges, means we're not really making any progress. At least the blob on the right is looking a bit better now. We've got them down to 2 units and I'm starting to disengage the cav because we've got some juicier targets. There are some unprotected crossbows up the street, so we charged down to attack them. Figured that would be a good plan, but actually there are some downsides to that, which we'll see in a second. On the left, we've now lost a lot of men trying to push through this little enemy block. The enemy have some pikes in the way, or the Vuld troops that is, and another full unit of crossbows, and they are doing some damage to us. I figured I was losing so many men because the tower was shooting me while that fight was ongoing, but we'll see later on some evidence that that is not the case. Here's a clue towards that actually. We see as my cav for some reason struggle to break through the enemy crossbows, these other crossbow units are shooting at the melee. And with the cav being slightly above the crossbows on the ground, the friendly fire probably isn't that bad. We might actually be taking more losses than the enemy are, so that is a shame. The initial blob is now finally finished off. We managed to rout the enemy's anti-cav stuff using our cav, so that was nice and cheeky. I think they're just not very good units. This unit of spears is done taking out a tower, and I foolishly told them to go open up that other street by attacking an enemy barricade. That's really not going to achieve anything. As it turns out, those barricades have a lot of health. Meanwhile, on the left, you can just about tell, we've actually lost. All of the melee units trying to push up that road have been defeated, and that is some nasty stuff. Meanwhile, this push, which I figured would be a guaranteed success, is going really poorly. We still can't hack through all of these crossbows. The knights just aren't doing the job. I figured this would be a real easy job for them, but no. So I ended up pulling them out to try and replace them with some spears instead. And on the left, here's me realizing that we have pretty much nothing over there. Time to try and use the crossbows to advance. Most of our crossbows, of course, have achieved nothing in this fight, and the ones inside the town really haven't done anything either, because they're just not firing, constantly moving, constantly skirmishing. You know the drill. I tried to get some cav to go around the very edge of this little fight and get those crossbows into melee. This sort of worked. Took a lot of micro to avoid the nearby enemy Vuld troops, but eventually here we go. However, the crossbows actually shoot a volley at me just as I come around the corner. We lose most of the surviving knights, and they rout just before that melee can get started. That is tragic. So yes, they're still going to be firing, but now I'm fighting sort of around a corner where the enemy can't quite see me, so the crossbows are no longer such a massive problem. Meanwhile, I've given up on trying to break through that barricade. We're sending the rest of our cav to go all the way around the town to finally get a rear attack on that enemy position where the crossbows won't die in the middle. They actually did die by the time I arrived, as it turned out. I think because I was fighting them with infantry units, that is, without cavalry, the other crossbows couldn't get line of sight on my men, so we weren't getting torn apart during the fight and things went okay. Meanwhile, we are getting torn apart on this annoying fight in the left corner. Still, we lose another unit in melee to the enemy crossbows somehow. we still haven't finished off the enemy's barely alive Vul's troops as well. I thought maybe we can actually shoot at them with our crossbows. Mostly they don't consider themselves to have line of sight because they can't shoot up and over things. So I try and micromanage this a bit, and finally we do get a confirmed shot that the crossbows do sometimes fire. They shot a volley into the enemy, they took a volley themselves, which probably did even more damage to them. Overall, that didn't really achieve much. However, our cav in the centre come around to rear attack those enemy crossbows. You can see I also went in for the frontal melee attack with mine, figuring at least that will definitely do something. And after one final slaughter, we finally secure this little corner of no consequence and can move on with our lives. Nicely, the final enemy unit, their leader, wasn't aggroed, it was just standing up here on this little raised area. So I can bring my crossbows over to snipe away at him, and he still didn't aggro after this. We took out a bunch of the bodyguards and eventually they routed under that pressure, ending the battle in a close victory. That was really a messy one and much worse than I thought. We even lost a few units, which I'm pretty sure wouldn't have happened if we just auto-resolved that one. You can see here, one of their crossbow units is responsible for about half of our casualties, and I think that's the guy who was on the corner, the guys I should say. They took out like 3 melee units, just without me noticing, off camera basically, because they were firing into the flanks of a unit that was just about not in melee with them or something. Overall, very, very messy stuff. However, at least we got the territory, and that's what we really need. We can replace dead troops easily enough. In fact, we can replace one of the units of Vul's troops that we lost in that battle right away. Now with that done, I think this part is going to come to an end, and while this has been an extremely rocky ride, I think overall things are going well. We have taken 2 enemy territories, and so far we haven't lost any, even though our capital is under siege. That barely matters. We've got everything. Toulouse, etc. More jokes like that are probably going to be coming up in the next part, along with more Total War action. Probably trying to finish off France here. I think they're in a pretty bad position overall. And I would like to send something on the crusade, even if it's just 1 unit. Since we can't really afford to send anything more, it would be nice to see how that whole mechanic works out in the mod. So why don't you join me for part 2 coming soon? And if you are not subscribed, you fool, you better subscribe now so that you don't miss it. I will see you then. I've been OffED. What a disaster.